Welcome to the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. We provide fiction reviews for the lit curious reader, because why not try a little of everything? Our scholarish approach and cozy book club atmosphere makes literature accessible to everyone. Whether you're a casual reader or a devoted bookworm, join us on our literary journey to explore all genres. Hello, I'm Joey, and I'll be today's host of Extra Literary Affairs. Today, Jennifer and I are going to have an affair with N.K. Jemisin and her short story, The Ones Who Stay and Fight, which was published in Lightspeed Magazine, issue 116 in January 2020.
Hey, Joey, before we get started, I think it would be a great time for us to talk about the new direction that we are going in with our project. We are so excited to announce that due to the success of our side projects and podcast and the themes we've been exploring, we've decided to shift our focus and officially make Extra Literary Affairs our main podcast. No more sneaking around, Joey. This is the real deal. We're doing it. This change reflects our growing motivation to tackle difficult ideas through the lens of literature. So, this will be hosted by myself and Joey, and the podcast will continue to dive into the stories that give us profound insight to society and the world around us. We believe great literature helps us understand the complexities of life, and we can't wait to share more conversations on these vital topics.
We'd also like to make it clear that we are no longer affiliated with the Lit Fiction brand. The perspectives shared here at Extra Literary Affairs are our own and do not reflect those of the previous brand. Any opinions expressed by Lit Fiction going forward are not representative of our views. We're excited to continue offering fresh insights and discussions under our Extra Literary Affairs brand. With that housekeeping out of the way, let me give you a little background on the author herself, because I have heard only good things about N.K. Jemisin, but I have never actually read any of her books, although I own, I think, one. So N.K. Jemisin was born on September 19th, 1972 in Iowa City, Iowa, of all places, in the USA. She's an American author of science fiction and fantasy short stories and novels, and she often explores issues such as racism, cultural conflict, and family relationships in her work. In 2016, Jemisin became the first Black writer to win a Hugo Award for Best Novel for the 5th season, which was published in 2015, which is the one that I have, so I obviously need to read it. She went on to win the award for the next 2 books in the trilogy, making her the first author to win 3 consecutive Hugo Awards from 2016 to 2018 for Best Novel. She also won a Nebula Award, 2 Locus Awards, and is a recipient of the MacArthur Genius Fellowship. So she is literally a genius, and that's intimidating to read someone's work that is literally a genius. So to ground us in our conversation before we start discussing, I would like to give us a brief summary, which is a little bit longer than our 100-word summary, but I think there is so much information in this one. It needs a little bit, and plus there's a lot of world building that's happening. So this was written by writingatlas.com because I thought they did an excellent job of capturing this story. Halat, which is how you pronounce this, I had to listen to the audiobook, is a joyous and motley city in the distant future, jubilantly celebrates the Day of Good Birds. In this society, nonconformity is revered, with variance seen in commemorative outfits, professions, or body shape and color. Every citizen is filled with kindness and generosity for their fellow Halatians. They don't subscribe to our contemporary ideas of tolerance, instead enacting real change to ensure equality between all peoples. To maintain such a perfect society, social worker, like inhabitants, obstruct any attempts to access historical information. Halat is a future iteration of the world we know today. Its fairness is achieved by concealing the past, our present, and its corrupt and discriminatory nature. However, in any underground crime network, these secrets of the past are gleaned and shared. To curb the spread of evil ideas, the social workers, citizens, kill those involved in information gleaning. In one such killing, the slain man's young daughter vows to retaliate against the social workers. Instead of putting down the potentially sinful daughter, the social workers extend a sympathetic hand to her. In closing, the author encourages the reader to similarly fight against oppressive ideals by helping those infected by them. Okay, and by the way, I mentioned that there is a free audiobook that comes with the story that is in the magazine, and I will link that in the episode description so that everybody can listen to it and read it because it's wonderful. Okay, so I will shut up now. So Jennifer, please share your first impressions and anything else you'd like to share.
Great. Before we get started with that, Joey, I wanted to say thank you so much for bringing this story and this publication Lightspeed into my life. I was previously unaware, as I think we've talked about before, that science fiction and fantasy is not necessarily the primary thing that I read. So
Mhm.
dipping my toe back into the genre, I'm like, I loved this story so much. I was so excited that I wanted to support the works of this author that I did go and download a paid copy of that Lightspeed episode. So highly recommend the story for anyone who is interested in reading it further on a larger format. Everything about this story spoke to me, and it was a lot of echoes of themes we've talked about in the past, but specifically, I think we've talked in the past about my love of Margaret Atwood and her dystopian fantasy world that she creates that is so close to our world that it's very believable that we can ebb into these other places. And the opening sentence, I'm like, this is the year of the flood by Margaret
Mhm.
Atwood when they talk about these feast days that they have for environmental pioneers or people who are scientific, or there are people who are human rights activists. All of their days in this other world of Margaret Atwood's is also reflected by honoring the saints. And so immediately I'm like, I feel this story is familiar, and it was familiar in such a great way. And I think for me, what set this story apart is that it clearly talks about the highest value in this new society is their humanity. And that was really ringing a lot of bells with me. And before we go any further in that, Joy, I just wanted to remind myself that this was written in 2018. So I decided, like, yes, I was alive in 2018. I was a fully functioning adult at that time, but like, what was going on in our world? What might she be reacting to as a result of that created the story? And we were in the middle of the Me Too movement. Brett Kavanaugh had just been elected, appointed to the Supreme Court.
Mhm.
There were, unfortunately, as there still is today, several major mass shootings, both in schools, at synagogues, at places of worship. It was just a very tumultuous time. And time passes and I forget about things. So when I went to, look up like what happened in 2018, I was like, oh my goodness. And then what was sadder to me about that, I'm like, this could have been written yesterday. I could have looked up what happened in America in 2024 and I would have read that exact list of difficulties. So I was very curious, as I often am, of what motivated the author to go down that path and how is this relevant to my lived experience. And I'm sure we will explore all of those themes, but I just thought that this was such a hopeful and beautiful and inspiring story that I, in particular, needed to read right now. So thank you for bringing that into my world and giving us a chance to expose other people to it.
You bring up a really good point in that obviously the America is labeled as barbaric in this story. I get it. Okay. And we are the other world that is looking at this world. We could kind of assume that N.K. Jemisin is the narrator in this, and she's speaking to us directly. N.K. Jemisin is doing something that Ursula K. Le Guin does in The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, which is mentioned in the story, in that she breaks the fourth wall and she invites the reader into the story. Both authors are talking directly to us. It's written in the second perspective. So she's referencing you, and we are the you in this, and everyone is the you in this story. That's a very unique style of writing, and it sometimes can sort of come off a little cheesy and a little like pick your own adventure book. And it does not in either of these stories, but especially in this one, where she's addressing us directly and she's assuming what our opinions are in this story, which I really, again, could have been a bad choice, but she does it so well, in my opinion, that I don't think that it affected the way that I read it. I understood why she assumed that this was our reaction. And I'll read a little bit of what she assumes. After she finishes the initial world building, which is super important in any sort of science fiction or fantasy story, because we need to be grounded. What are the rules of the society? How does physics work? They've mastered gravity here, which is interesting if you're into sci-fi, but we won't have to go into that because that's not really our brand. But she gets done explaining how utopic this society is, comparing it to the United States, saying it's barbaric in comparison to and Omelas. And then she refers to us again. She says she's talking about how well everyone interacts with each other and how pragmatic their solutions are, and that there are still ills of the past, but they are fully recognized. And in this case, she's talking about workplace diversity and how there are still signs that there was an imbalance in that in certain workplaces. In the corporate world of Umhalat, there are still more white workers than there are people of color. But she's saying this is addressed. They see it. They're not saying they tolerate this. They're going to make they're making actual change, but change sometimes is incremental. And so this society is very pragmatic is the best way to explain. But anyway, our reaction that Jemisin gives us is she says, does that seem wrong to you? It should not. The trouble is that we have a bad habit encouraged by those concealing ill intent of insisting that people already suffering should be afflicted with further unnecessary pain. This is the paradox of tolerance, the treason of free speech. We hesitate to admit that some people are just fucking evil and need to be stopped. This is Umhalat after all, and not that barbaric America. This is not Omelas, a tick of a city fat and happy with its head buried in a tortured child. Racism is natural, so natural that we call it tribalism to insinuate that everyone does it. Sexism is natural, and homophobia is natural, and religious intolerance is natural, and greed is natural, and cruelty is natural, and savagery and fear and impossible, you hiss, your fists slowly clenching at your sides. How dare you? What have these people done to make you believe such lies? What are you doing to me to suggest that this is possible? How dare you? How dare you? And then she replies, oh, friend, I fear I have offended. My apologies. Yet, how else can I convey Umhalat to you, even when even the thought of a happy, just society raises your ire so? Though I confess I am puzzled as to why you are so angry. It's almost as if you feel threatened by the very idea of equality. Almost as if some part of you needs to be angry, needs unhappiness and injustice. But do you?
I love that you took us there because there are so many beautiful passages like that where she's like, I'm going to tell you the world in which I live in, and you are going to think this is a complete utopian fantasy. And she even says the word, this is not a dystopian world that I'm building. This is the world that we live in. And it is so far from your experience that you can't imagine it. And what I appreciated about you taking us to that passage right there, that she name checks the Ursula Le Guin story. So it's like there's this continuum of ideas of what is a utopia like. And we are going to discuss that story that we've both read, but we haven't discussed here yet in the weeks to come. And I think it will be very useful to understanding that sort of in a spectrum of understanding. But I really appreciated that because she, in talking about that, she's like, there were problems in that utopia as well. So let's not pretend that everything is always perfect. She does hint to this darker past. And she said that there's also initiation in this story where she says, at a certain time in a young person's life, they are told basically the canon of the important ideas and the history of their society. And a lot of them are really shocked. And I immediately went back to my own experience being in high school and learning about the Japanese internment camps. Like, I'm like, that didn't happen. Like, we're the United States. Like, we would never do that.
Mhm.
And it was sort of that stripping away of innocence versus the ideals that you have about a time and a place based on what you want to be true. And then when you're exposed to it as a young person, you're in a lot of disbelief. And so I just thought she did a really great job with that. And I want to go back to your first point, which where she said, hey, she's kind of addressing, hey, you. And I wanted to just jump to the very end of the story because I think she did that super effectively of making us complicit in this storytelling in a very positive way.
I agree. This is a very positive story. Even though the section that I just read from is very honest, I think this whole story is a very hopeful. It's hope core.
It's hope core. I love that. Like you introduced me to cozy core, and now I kind of
Mhm.
understand some of these newer terms. Thank you for going there with me, Joey. So near the end of the story, she says, "And now we come to you, my friend, my little soldier. See what I've done? So insidious, these little thoughts going both ways along the quantum path. Now perhaps you will think of umhilat and wish. And so she realized, as we talk about this idea of being infected by ideas and ideas from the past, and there's this communication channel because they in the world that they've built, and I think that's really important that you took us to that point, Joey. The world that they built, they said you can communication is possible, but no one ever actually tries between these two universes.
Mhm.
And once someone kind of tapped into a radio frequency and they could sort of buy on this utopia and they could see how the world was in the US, that these are stark contrasts. So I just thought she did an amazing job of reminding us that ideas are contagious and you can stamp them out or you can encourage their growth. And when they were talking specifically about those social workers, and they called them social workers.
Mhm.
And for me, I've been watching, this is a little sidebar, but it's so relevant. I'm going to trust me that I've been watching Call the Midwife. And in there are midwives from the 1950s and 60s in England going around and delivering babies at home. They're doing this in conjunction with a order of nuns. So the nuns and the nurses are working together. And I think when she was describing the outfits of these particular people in their gray smocks and just kind of being very peaceful warriors for making sure everyone was included, I snapped right back to the image of like, is this a cloistered nun? Is this a person who just
Mm.
conveys this peaceful, embracing attitude that all are welcome here, that everyone has a place? And so it was just very interesting to me to have a non-religious theme in this particular story. There was no religion, zero religion is in this story, other than reminding the reader that this society values kindness and humanity for all inhabitants. And she recognizes that that is not the case in all societies. And I just thought she did it really effective without being, she hit us a little bit on the nose with a couple of things, but I think overall the story was very effective and very hopeful that if you would like to live in this type of world, do it. It starts with you, right? Do your part.
Yeah, that's a good point about the social workers is that they're almost dressed in like a habit. So they're very easy, they would be easily identifiable in this society. And it seems like they are well respected because we have the social one of the social workers who acknowledges this man's pin that he was very nervous about wearing and debuting it in public. And she was basically like, Slay, that slays. You're killing it. And everyone was like, Yeah, he is slaying. So yeah, that I just like this very positive force for good, even though there is sort of capital punishment. It's a difficult topic because on one hand you would say like, well, murder's wrong. That's objectively true. Okay, but they refer to a disease here. The author is talking about after this man has been killed by the social workers. The disease has taken one poor victim, but it need not claim more. In this manner is the contagion contained in a moment. In a moment. They're referring to this disease. And I don't know about you, but I could not at first. I read this story 3 times now because it like brings me joy to read this story. So it's sort of selfish, but I couldn't really figure out into this final reading what was she talking about? What is the disease? What is this contagion? And I think that it's greed. And that is what people are learning when they are sort of tapping into our actual world, the earth, and primarily the United States, as obviously she's referring to that. She is now talking to us, the reader, after we have learned that this man has been murdered and that his child is reacting. So, are you better able to accept this post colonial utopia now that you see its bloody teeth? Ah, but they did not choose this battle. The people of Umhalat today, their ancestors did, when they spun lies and ignored conscience in order to profit from others' pain. Their greed became a philosophy, a religion, a series of nations, all built on blood. And so that is what I think I have concluded.
Joey, please finish that. I'm going to finish that
Oh yeah,
paragraph because
that's the
that
only
was
part that I
so
took.
good. So it says, the greed became a philosophy, a religion, a series of nations, all built on blood. Umhalat has chosen to be better, but sometimes only by blood sacrifice may true evil be kept at bay. And that's when she then turns immediately to the reader and says, and now we come to you, my friend, my little soldier. right? Going back to that militaristic, sometimes you have to take a harder stance. Do you see what I've done? So insidious, these little thoughts going both ways along the quantum path. Now, perhaps you will think of Halat and Wish. And I just really loved that she acknowledges these women, men, people of all genders and persuasions. She was very clear that every incarnation of person is welcome there, who are dressed in these gray costumes. Their heads are shaved. She was very clear that they kind of have a look. They have studs in the embedded in their skull, so they're very
Hmm.
easily identifiable. And she sort of hints like maybe those metal discs also have some sort of control or punitive aspect, because she also mentioned something about like we all have our own ways of ensuring society's expectations or something along those lines. My point in saying that is that she felt, I think, in this moment, telling a story where everything is peace and love and rainbows and we all get along and everyone is valued and nobody is put down and everybody has enough food. And she did a really great job of world building. It's like, this place is great. Like, we've got a lot of time to sit around and think about stuff because all of our other social ills have kind of faded away by the way we have worked on our society. That she acknowledges someone from outside of that society is going to think that's not real, that that's not even possible. Like, that's ridiculous. Dogs don't fly. Like, why are you, like kind of a mind leap. You're like, I've never seen a dog fly. I'm like, well, here they do. And that's not what they say in the story, but it was just kind of that leap. It's just like, well, let me tell you something you can relate to. Violence, anger. She addresses us, the reader, of like, I don't know why me talking about a joyful, peaceful society is making you so mad, but it is. And when she asked that question about, do you need that to be true? Do you need your anger? And then she paused and she's like, do you? And I think that
Hmm.
was just such an effective use of repetition of phrase to ask the reader directly to themselves to question, do I need anger? Like, is that an important thing for me? Is that what I want? Because she's modeling through these social workers peace, love, forgiveness, practicality. So I hope we do go to that quote, Joey, when she says we're not just all, starry-eyed dreamers. We actually are practical. We are taking concrete measures to ensure our society can be fair for all. And that is why they have to do this state-sanctioned merciful killing of the quote unquote affected person who was spreading these antiquated ideals of racism, greed, all of the things that she mentioned that had been eradicated in their current society. They're kind of peeking into the past saying, well, we used to have this. We used to have this. We used to have this other thing. And they're like, yeah, we stamped that out. Please don't bring it back.
It's sort of complicated in a complicated idea because on one hand, they are teaching kids when it's appropriate, when they reach an appropriate age, as you mentioned before, that they give them this information. So they're not suppressing history or the learning of history. They're using education to combat ignorance in real time. And that happens again incrementally, which I think the author is very honest and open about and very transparent that this is not something that happened overnight. It was something that everybody had to collectively work towards. But I think she's very, very specific and very, very careful about how she defines evil in this world. Because she says, even here, where only things that cause harm to others are called evil, the information gleaners know what they did is wrong. They know this is what destroyed the old cities, and indeed they are horrified at what they hear through the speaker, see on the screens. They begin to perceive that ours is a world where the notion that some people are less important than others has been allowed to take root and grow until it buckles and cracks the foundations of our humanity.
Joey, I will jump in there because that
Okay.
was one of the things that I highlighted. She continues to say, how could they, the gleaners exclaim, of us? Why would they do such things? How can they just leave those people to starve? Why do they not listen when that one complains of disrespect? What does it mean that these ones have been assaulted and no one cares? Who treats people like that? And yet, even amid their marvel, they share an idea. The evil spreads and is that luminous kind of overshadowing. if you don't address this, it's going to pop back up. But saying it didn't
Mhm.
exist or ignoring that is not an option. They very conscientiously initiate their teenagers, their young adults into these ideas with some foundational knowledge. But these information gleaners who are kind of like this underground communication network. And she said something that was very Margaret Atwood-ish to me that said, art and whispers are traded. The forbidden is so seductive, is it not? Even here, where only things that cause harm to others are called evil. And you had referenced that before, but she does talk about the seductive nature of the transgressive, that people are just kind of naturally curious about the things that are the flip side of the society that they're in.
Yeah, and I think what I'm assuming, because like I said, Jemison doesn't give us every single little detail. That would require a very long epic fantasy novel, not a short story. But I think the difference in the education that they provide their world and their young is that they're giving them a full context and the repercussions of this information. They're saying this is what happens when you have homophobia and racism and greed and profits over people. And this is what happened when we did that as a society. And the gleaners who are illegally spreading this information are doing it because they're thinking, oh, there was a pecking order at one point, and why should I have less power? I could have, even though this seems like everyone has an equal amount of power in this society, there are those people who think like I could make a power grab. There is a playbook here. And so I think it's the context in which that they're given this information. And this is true for learning history in our real world here on Earth. Is if you learn certain things about, I don't know, let's say the Roman Empire, because sometimes there's this weird thing where people think the Roman Empire was a super cool place to live. No, it was not. It was not a cool place to live. Caesars were dictators. That was not fun. It wasn't fun for everybody. Okay.
Only
So
fun for like one guy. One
yeah.
guy was having a really great time.
Yeah, and so you brought up something in the machine stops, Jennifer, that was a really good point was who is this utopia for? Because this Umhala is a utopia for all its people, unless you want to be a little dirty little gleaner and want to spread hate. But if you recognize humanity and other people and you have empathy, then no matter what your beliefs are, as long as it's not spreading evil, and in this case, Jemison has defined evil for us very specifically, then you are free to express yourself however you see fit. There's no hard feelings between you and any other people in your society. I think she handles all of these topics extremely well, and it's really, I think, hard to create a utopic society and make it a good fit for everyone. And I think she shows that sometimes it's not. There are things that are going to be a negative. I mean, I guess it depends. I'm not condoning the murdering of people, of course, but I can see why they are reacting to this as a contagious disease, because that's what will happen. She's being very, very specific about what is the evil of this world and how is it spread.
I'm glad you took us there, Joey, because I wanted to go back to the plotting of this story. You brought up so many points, and all I can say is like, please, 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 people, read the story for yourself because it is so beautiful. And before I go back to the point about her plotting, I wanted to say one of the foundations of the society, she said words like fat or bald or short or any of those words that could be discriminatory. She wrote this beautiful passage comparing that to if you were a different kind of horse, you can say, I'm a Clydesdale, I'm a Palomino, I am a hairy-footed Clydesdale. She's like, those words, because there's no evil intent, they're only descriptors, they lose
Mm,
their power. There's no sting. You could say, oh, that's a tall person, that's a fat person, that's a yellow person, that's a green person. None of those things had a sting because all variations of people were allowed. And I just thought that was such a beautiful way to say, I think there's a lot of conversation in our current environment that people are like, oh, I'm not allowed to express myself. I can't say certain words because those words are harmful to others. And in this utopia that she brought, when we no longer use differences as good or bad, evil, approved, everything is sort of allowed as long as you're operating in kindness, all of those labels just lose their tang. So you just use the label because it's no longer something that is a wedge. It is just a honest descriptor. And I really appreciated that.
Mhm. I do think she says that, like, those really those words that are, like, either racist or homophobic, transphobic, those words are not allowed, and that's, like, something that it's just not in their lexicon. But yes, the, like, fat, sure, you have, I don't know, acne or something like that. Like, those words hold no ill intent anymore. But yeah, I really like that part. I mean, I again, I would live in this utopia.
I want to talk again about the power of words. So she said, oh, some of this will be familiar to you in concept, at least, like terms for gender that mean neither he nor she, and the combination of words meant to slur and denigrate. And yet you will puzzle over the umhalation's choice to retain descriptive terms for themselves like kinky haired or fat or deaf. But these are just words, friend. Don't you see? Without the attached contempt, such terms have no more meaning than if horses could proudly introduce themselves as palomino or miniature or hairy footed. Difference was never the problem in and of itself. And the Amhalations still have differences with each other of opinion and otherwise. Of course they do. They're people. And so I appreciated that she's being so generous with our ability to reframe the words that we use and we don't use. And she did talk about when they have that, like, what I'm going to say, a coming of age ceremony for the young people where they're kind of explaining the history. Nothing is hidden, but they're like, wait, people said those words? Like that was a thing that people actually talked about and judged people on? They're just blown away. They're like, that's so silly, right? For them, they're just like, why would anyone do that? And I think it's so interesting, Joy. Sometimes we talk about like different generations and how things are passed down through the generations and
Mhm.
what my grandmother perhaps would say, like in the Flannery O'Connor era, she would say something that was totally within her social norm. And society was like, uh huh, yep, that's right. And I come to you and I'm like, hey, Joey, I'm going to say this word to you. And you're like, no, you're not, because we don't use topics like, we don't say things like that. That's not something I want to participate in. And the best way for me to not participate in that is to not participate in that, right? It's like, I'm going to end this here
Mhm.
with me. And so I have a lot of hope, as does the story. I think that future generations can, if they choose to, make some very concrete choices about the world in which they want to live in. They're not naive. They know it's going to be tough. But if you just completely wear people down with your kindness and your open mindedness, and you're like, hey, everybody is just trying to be peaceful and kind. That's all you have to do in the society. You got to be peaceful and kind. The end.
I think the best message the most important message I should say from the story is that education is the sort of antidote to hate and ignorance and all the bad societal ills that anyone has ever experienced. It's just educate yourself. If education will solve it. If you know enough more about this topic and objective truths, you will probably stop hating the thing that you now understand. So, yeah, it's just like, and I know I was kind of going into the Roman Empire thing, but it's like if you don't have the full context of how Julius Caesar came to power, let's say, because obviously he's probably the most famous of the Caesars there, you're not going to get that he committed a genocide to start a national crisis that it was made up. The Gaul, he attacked Gaul, by the way. Okay. And he slaughtered them because they were not prepared. They were not as powerful as Rome. And he claimed a victory that was not really a win. It was just punching down. So, like, if you don't know that, if you think like, oh, this was a great man, he was an amazing like strategist, blah 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 blah, you're like, no, you're missing the point. He committed genocide. He committed war crimes. Okay, anyway, I'm not like against. I mean, I am against Julius Caesar for obvious reasons, but like, if you don't get the full context of what he did, then you're missing something. And that's the best part I think about this story for me is that they're giving people a chance, children, to live in this society without that weighing them down by saying like, here, you do have differences from your friends. You are different from them. They're saying like, no, we're all the same. We're all human beings or Halations. And then when it's appropriate and they can understand this information without internalizing it, which I think is very important, that they're able to see the objective truths and the repercussions, as I mentioned.
Yeah, Joy. And so that takes me to the part where of the story where we're now going to talk about the plot. Because right when she talks about her definition of evil, right, she has described to us what that evil is. And she said, the evil dot 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 spreads. The very next thing, the very next thing we know in this story is so the social workers of the Umhalat stand talking now over the body of a man. He is dead, early, unwilling, with a beautifully crafted pike jammed through his spine and heart. The spine to make it painless, the heart to make it quick. This is only one of the weapons carried by the social workers, and they prefer it because the pike is silent, because there was not shot nor ricochet, no crackle or sizzle, no scream. No one else will come to investigate. The disease has taken one poor victim, but it need not claim more. In this manner is the contagion contained in a moment, in a moment. And again, when you talk about the full breadth of history, they're not overshadowing, oh, we're so peaceful, everything is allowed, everybody is wonderful. It's like when this infection of ideas that we have overcome in the past pops back up, it's better to mercifully end it.
Mhm.
And I'd like to compare that when they see his daughter, who's this young person. And she, instead of having this peaceful thing, she's like, I want revenge. You murdered my father. Vigilantism is like planted in her little baby heart right now. And you're like, well, that's contagion part two. Like she's whatever he had, she has. And you're like, they're definitely going to kill this kid. Like you can't, two peas in a pod. Like we got to just stamp this out. We don't get that ending. We get a hand extended and said, we are going to help educate this child. We are going to show mercy. We are going to see if we can help her understand the larger society and her place in it. And I just thought, yes, yes, more of that, please. So we were not afraid to shed blood when necessary, but she's just not on a like, well, you got one, you might as well do the next one. Like we've already broken the seal of murder, so let's just go for it. And I just
Yeah.
thought that was just such a beautiful way to remind us that sometimes a necessary culling of evil is required. But in general, let's try to preserve the life and rehabilitate people through education, through kindness, through our example of honoring their humanity and their anger. Of course, this
Mhm.
child is lashing out. Her father was murdered.
In front of her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I was kind of having that whole, when you think back what was going on in 2018, we had the Me Too movement, we had the start of all of this sort of social justice education that became more widespread, that people were kind of thinking about like, wait, why are these things happening again? And like, what can we do about it? And I just thought that was
Mhm.
very interesting that she could, and again, we're not making this a religious story, but I think her humanity was turn the other cheek, to try to teach this daughter that like there's another way to be and she doesn't have to be contaminated with hatred, which is what they're evil, what they're stamping out, that
Mhm.
she can have a different life. And that felt
Yeah.
super hopeful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is a very utilitarian philosophy because they're saying they revere their dead, the dead that they had to have the social workers have to kill. They say that they're all buried in this very beautiful area, that they do it with care and love, and they want to make sure that they're honored for their sacrifice because that's a utilitarian idea, is that you're sacrificing this one person for the good of the many. And whether you think that's a good idea or not is up to you. That's not for me to decide. But in that same section, after they discover the little girl, the author makes a really good point when she says the little girl said, I will get revenge, but she doesn't ask why, which is the typical reaction from the Halations, because they would want to know, why did you kill my father? And they would be open and willing to hear the reason and probably accept it, it sounds like. But in this case, the little girl was saying with her actions and her words that she believed her father was more important than social workers, and in fact, more important than the entire city of Umhalat and their whole society. And she was putting this one person, putting him on a pedestal and saying, like, I would rather the world burn around me than have this one person that I loved that was going to infect society and bring us back to this horrible state that reflects Earth and the United States. I'd rather have that and have my one person. And again, that's hard. Utilitarian philosophy is a hard concept to sort of figure out which side you're really on. I think conceptually and logically, we would all say, yes, I would choose, if I was that little girl, I would choose to see my father killed for the benefit of the many. But if we're in that situation, we're all emotional people, obviously. We all have feelings as humans or Halations. So it makes sense to me that she would have that reaction. But I think it's such a shocking thing to read, sort of, because this is not the appropriate reaction in this society. Is it's to be like, yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, you told me, I asked you why, you reasonably told me, I logically understand that, and I can accept it. But yeah, it's well done, I have to say. But I do want to say, because we're both struggling to read it out loud, and it's not because it's poorly written at all. I think Jemisin has a very unique authorial tone and voice, and that's not a dig at all. I think it's well written, and even on like a sentence level, I think this is well written story. I think it's so unique though, and again, that's not shade. I'm not being shady. That it's like hard to read out loud.
Yeah, Joey, I take that as a complete compliment. And the fact that both you and I, who usually don't struggle reading things aloud, that we've
We
read
do it all the
multiple
time.
times, right? That's a thing that we're accustomed to doing. I also agree with you. She has such a unique voice that voice can't come out of my mouth, right? It's
Hmm.
not my words, it's not my phrasing, but it's so effectively done both in writing and with the audio that is included with this story. That
Hmm.
person nailed every single thing. There was not a
Yeah.
hiccup. And it felt completely natural. So I really appreciate that. But Joy, I want to go back to something that you said about the child. She is a child. So a
Hmm.
child is not going to be like, oh, yes, yay, humanity. Let's do that. I'm like, you just killed my dad. And the last words her dad said was, I'm sorry. Right.
Hmm.
So there's like a big moral question. It's like, if can you be redeemed for being an evil information gleaner bad guy? Or are you sorry you were caught? Are you sorry you're going to die because your daughter's now going to
Hmm.
be an orphan? Like, what are you sorry for? But what was interesting to me when you brought us to that scene is that she didn't ask why. And there's such a fundamental value in this society for knowledge, for compassion, for empathy, for valuing all lives as equal, that I think the daughter, the young girl, went against those social norms by being like, oh no, I'm getting revenge. And instead of the societal norm of like, oh, why did this punishment come to my father? And I thought that was a very interesting choice on the author's point to remind us that child was acting as a child, right? As an unsophisticated emotional being who was.
Also, sorry, I just want to also say that this is prior to her learning and having that initiation ceremony kind of thing.
Yes, because I'm going to take you right there, Joey. So thank you for saying that. So it says, what? What surprises you? Did you think this would end with the cold-eyed slaughter of a child? There are other options. And this is Umhalat, friend, where even a pitiful, diseased child matters. They will keep her in quarantine and reach out to her for several days. If the girl accepts the hand, listens to them, they will try to explain why her father had to die. She is early for the knowledge, but something must be done. Do you see? And then they immediately talk about they're going to do this hands-on burial. They're like, we will bury
Mm.
him in this sacred space. We will do it with our own hands. You know, my hand was on the pike that ended your life. The least I can do is bury you with those same hands and honor that you were sacrificed for the greater good. And so I loved this story. It's not necessarily genre that I spend a lot of time in, but I was like, oh my goodness, like, thank you for taking us into a world where we're not making religiously ordained judgments. She says the society was built by people who talked about and decided together as a community how they wanted to be.
Mhm.
And that was agreed upon through the generations. And she said, we didn't start here, but we got here. And she made a really beautiful statement, and I maybe we'll be able to pull it up, about what are cities for? Are they for greed? Are they for producing energy? Are they about power? Or are they places where people come together to live and care for one another? And they talk a lot about caregiving. And so I
Mhm.
don't want to gender the story because that's not what this is about, but it did feel there was a lot of caretaking, a lot of patience, a lot of female, what I call a female energy, this gentle compassion, which crosses all genders. But for me, that's my experience of when the time comes, the social worker who was in charge, they said, she's this tall, stately, brown skinned woman who is very looked up to in the community.
Mhm.
She stuck this pike through the guy's heart. At the With the next hand, she reaches out to the daughter and said, "You can be saved if you listen to our message." So I just thought that was just a really beautiful, non-gendered, non-stereotypical gender role that everyone can have all of the parts within themselves as leaders. And I want to go back just one quick question to you, Joey, about when you brought up the guy with the homemade pin. Like they're
Mhm.
doing this when the story starts out, they're having this beautiful celebration of the Day of Good Birds. So it's a whole community, a very localized thing, and anything with wings is being celebrated, like birds, butterflies, beetles, all the things. And so he has this homemade pin, and it's the female gaze who lands on him. And she points to him and says, "Oh, look at your beetle." And in that moment, it says in the story, like he's like really nervous and all eyes are on him. And I think in a different story, that could have been a shaming thing. Like, "Oh my God, look at that beetle. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, why is this
Mhm.
man wearing this?" Like that. It's just, no, it's not a Hermes scarf. It is just this thing you made in your backyard. So like you are trash.
Yeah.
That was the exact opposite, where her female gaze was with kindness, with curiosity. And then the guy, like, he blushed and then he was like, "Oh, wait, look at my pin." Like, everybody's like looking at it and liking it. And I just thought that was such a beautiful way that because she said she pointed at him. And, pointing, which I just pointed at you on the video, which people won't be able to see, can,
Yeah.
can often be like an aggressive act, right? Like you
Mhm.
can point something out, which is a beautiful thing. It's like, "Oh, let me show you the story." Or you can point your finger to accuse someone of something they did or did not do. So I just thought that was just a beautiful image of the power, as we had spoken about earlier, the power to choose how you are interacting with other people and how that impacts them. And more importantly to me, how it impacts the people around them who witness that behavior and figure out, is this how we are or is this how we're not?
Mhm.
And I think she did a great job of tying all those pieces together.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that I never really even thought about is like the role of leadership in this halot is these social workers are obviously revered and looked up to. And when they make a decision, whether and it to benefit others, people quickly follow suit. So like they have to be very cognizant of how they are acting, and it's all everyone seems very genuine. I don't think anyone's like faking it to be like, "Oh, I just gotta like make it seem like I like this guy's pen." She genuinely loved this man's pen, and it was infectious. This was another type of contagious thing that was like a contagious amount of joy to celebrate this man and his creativity and individuality. And I think that's an important distinction here in this story as well, because she does compare it to America, to the United States, in that this is somehow the perfect balance between individualism and the collective mindset. Couldn't think of what I was going to say there. Where the United States is very individualistic. It's sort of like, if it doesn't affect me, then I don't really care. Whereas here they have this collective mindset that it is for the benefit of all, but we can still express ourselves as individuals. And I do want to go to how uh, part of what I love about this story so much is the joy that comes from it in this celebration of the Day of Good Birds, where I'll just read it, where when people are decorating themselves and costuming themselves. So some wings are organza stitched onto school backpacks. Some are quilted cotton stuffed with dried flowers and clipped to jacket shoulders. Some few have been carefully glued together from dozens of butterfly discarded wings, but only those butterflies that died naturally, of course. Thus adorned children who could run through the streets do so, leaping off curbs and making whooshing sounds as they pretend to fly. Those who cannot run instead ride special drones belted and barred and double checked for safety, which gently bounce them into the air. And I think there's this little hint that there is equity. This is not just an equal society. This is an equitable society, which is a very these are different things. Hopefully we all are aware of that, where equality would mean we all have the same thing, but equity means that we, in case anyone does not know, equity is some people get a little bit more, some people get a little bit less, but so that we're all on an even playing field. So
Based
those
on
children
what
who
they need, right, Joey? Like those
yes,
kids who
yes.
needed to be on the wheelie carts, they got them, as well as the kids who could jump with their own legs. Those
Yeah.
that is
So they could
equitable.
experience the same joy and not have to sit out and be like, "Oh, I wish that I feel a certain type of way because of my limitations." There's no need for that because that's not the type of society that they're in. That's just a fact about them, which we were both just talking about, is like this is just like an adjective about yourself, and it holds nothing other than this is just a piece of who you are, but it's not limiting you in any way, and no one is going to hold that against you because there's no need. You're doing exactly what all your other peers are doing at this moment on this day. And I think what I love so much about this story are so many things, and I keep saying that, but the idea that they only use butterflies that died naturally to adorn themselves. And there's a lot of talk about adorning themselves with things that they made or things that they can collect and sort of so there is just like this homeostasis with nature. And they set up Amhalat it sits at the confluence of three rivers and an ocean. This places it within the migratory path of several species of butterfly and hummingbird as they travel north to south and back again. So they are coexisting with nature. And it reminds me of like indigenous populations and Native Americans, where there was a reverence for the land that they lived on and the nature around them and the animals. And it wasn't to disrupt each other, it was to live and coexist together and benefit mutually. So, and I think that's just like a concept that is also hard for us to understand as we are not Malaysians, where we kind of go in and we're like, well, that's mine now. There's always an apartment complex opening or being built in New Jersey where I live. We're reducing the amount of nature to make more space. Sometimes I would say we probably don't need an apartment complex everywhere in New Jersey on every corner, but yeah, I just really love that the homeostasis between people and nature.
Yeah, Joey, I appreciate that you took us there because she opens the story there, right? She's telling it's three rivers that come together near the ocean, right? So you have salt water, you have fresh water. She says, especially on the day of good birds, farmers are celebrated. Like they're really honored for their wisdom. And she's like, this is true wisdom. You may think it's simple, but this is wisdom. And she's like, the farmers farm. And if they can't, they go on to fishing. And if they can't go fishing, they go on to gathering. And so like she was very clear of this, allowing the earth to replenish itself, to go where the resources are, and honoring that. And she really pulls that out. And I think that, as I said in the start of our episode, it reminded me of the world building that Margaret Atwood does in The Year of the Flood, when mankind is kind of wiped off the earth. And there's a band of people who kind of like, oh, we're starting over. How does this work? And being sensitive to the power of nature when technology is removed is very important. And I think she sort of started us there with that natural beauty. And Joey, the thing that I wanted to take us back to is what's a city for? Because that was something that was really important to me to be like, oh, she calls this out. Like, what's a city for? And she says, and so this is Umhalat, a city whose inhabitants simply care for one another. That is a city's purpose, they believe, not merely to generate revenue or energy or products, but to shelter and nurture the people who do these things. And then she transitions in and says, What have I forgotten to mention? Oh, it's the thing that will seem most fantastic to you, friend, the variety. The citizens of Umhalat are so many and so wildly different in appearance and origin and development. People in this land come from many others, and it shows in the sheen of skin and the kink of hair and the plumpness of lip and hip. If one wanders the streets where the workers and the artisans do their work, there are slightly more people with dark skin. If one strolls the corridors of the executive tower, there are a few extra done in pale. There is history rather than malice in this, and it is still being actively, intentionally corrected because the people of Umhalat are not native believers in good intentions as the solutions to all ills. No, there are no worshippers of mere tolerance here, nor desperate grovelers for that grudging pittance of respect which is diversity. Halatians are learned enough to understand what must be done to make the world better and pragmatic enough to actually enact it. And I
Mhm.
just love that passage so much. Thanks for indulging me to let me read that because she's like, I love that she's like, some of them are painted in pale, right? And just like we all have a different hue and it's random. And in this society, they're not making any fuss about it. They said there's some historical carryover of how we got here, but we're going to be very pragmatic about how we build our society moving forward. And so it's not just an airy fairy piece of, oh, wouldn't it be great? And like everyone's just going to get along. And it's like, no, we're going to set some rules in place and we are going to reward people who are able to conform to allowing people to be seen as human and not as a sum of their body parts.
Yeah, yeah, I really do. I love everything about this story, but I do love that part as well because they're acknowledging that and I said this earlier too, is like there are still things, remnants of the old society where you have it's not as diverse as they would prefer it to be in Amhalat, but they are like, no, we're not pretending that the good intent is going to get us where we want to be. We have a plan and that's what we're going to do. We're going to be very, and again, pragmatic is the best way to explain it. It's like they see the problem, they acknowledge it, they're totally aware of it, and they're taking actionable steps to reverse it. And that's great. And that's what we should all do.
I love it, Joe. Yes, it's like it's not just wishful thinking, it is
Yeah.
positive intention plus action. Like, okay, I can get behind that. So, Joey, this has been such a wonderful conversation. And thank you so much for bringing this story to my attention. And I'm really looking forward to reviewing some of these themes as we maybe retrospectively look back on the last few things we have read, including The Machine Stops. And we are going to read something really fun next week. And I really look forward to furthering our understanding of what these writers are up to, right? What world are they building and how effectively are they able to convince us of the worlds they've created?
Thank you for listening to the Extra Literary First podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. And don't worry, it'll be our little secret you stepped out of your literary comfort zone. Check out our link tree to follow us on TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, and Storygraph.